I'm Ben Kiefer, and today you're listening to an archive edition of our program. When you think of camouflage, what springs to mind? Do you picture soldiers in the woods or in the desert, or a chameleon changing colors? Well, camouflage is so much more than that. It's zebras' stripes that confuse predators. It's the bold geometric patterns painted on World War I warships. The fake town built over a Boeing factory. We'll hear about that later. And today, in our day and age, technology that helps you evade facial recognition cameras. It's both a natural phenomenon and a human art form. It's a science, it's espionage, and it's survival. Well, the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C., is launching a new exhibition. It's called Camouflage, Designed to Deceive. And they asked an Iowan to write the introduction. Roy Behrens is a professor emeritus of graphic design at the University of Northern Iowa. He wrote the introduction to the exhibition catalog and has spent decades studying how camouflage works and why it matters. Later this hour, we'll hear from Roy Behrens. He'll take us deeper into this fascinating world of principles that make camouflage work in nature, in warfare, and in the world of spies. But first, I recently spoke with the museum's vice president of exhibits about what this show reveals. Katheryn Keane, welcome to our program.
Thanks, Ben.
Let's talk about where this came from. What made you and your team decide to tackle camouflage as an exhibition topic?
Well, camouflage is a fascinating subject. With origins in nature, it's been adapted by humans in so many interesting ways and has many what we like to think are hidden connections to the world of espionage, which of course is the focus of our museum. We tell stories dedicated to the history of intelligence, and we felt like this subject had some interesting connections that our audience might not immediately make. Camouflage is, of course, used by humans for hunting, probably early humans for hunting, but eventually found its way to the battlefield and has been adopted into the culture as a symbol of pride and protest, identity, even high fashion. So it's got these interesting tentacles and connections into the world that we live in. There are kids down in the museum that have camo hats on, and I bet you they don't know the history of camouflage. So we thought we would set out to tell it. Of course, technology has dramatically impacted and changed the ways in which we can disappear into our surroundings and achieve sort of true stealth capabilities and see beyond the visible spectrum. But the fate of the society, we live in sort of a society of mass surveillance. So it's really, truly harder than ever to actually disappear. So the subject seems very relevant to today, and
Absolutely.
We're excited for the visitors to the museum to see it.
Right. It runs from March of 2026 for 3 years, so people have plenty of time to get out to D.C. to see this. In the few minutes we have, let's walk through the 4 main sections I understand that visitors encounter. Give us a survey. Walk us quickly through those sections.
Yeah, it's such a big subject that we were really challenged to think about how to put it together in an exhibition format. We decided to focus on the scientific principles of camouflage, which I'm sure Roy will talk a little bit more about when you hear from him. But these scientific principles, we assigned verbs to them that we think sound more like the Spy Museum. So disappear, distort, disguise, and deceive. And each one of those words sort of represents a different aspect of a principle of camouflage. So you will enter the exhibit, you'll go into an immersive experience where you'll have a sort of a camouflage experience. You'll have 3 separate environments that you'll be challenged to find the camouflage figures, whether they be animals or figures. And then you'll be invited into these 4 galleries that that sort of go through storytelling within each one of these principles that are really, really interesting stories from history that you probably have not heard before.
Yeah, and let's jump so much in this exhibition we won't be able to get to in any detail here, but World War II stands out. And I understand that there's a World War II story in each gallery. Why do you think that war produced so many camouflage innovations? And give us an example of what jumped out, or I guess didn't jump out for you in World War II.
Yeah, we didn't set out to do that, but the more we researched the subject and we're looking for sort of fascinating stories to tell, the more we realized that some of the most creative stories come out of World War II. And I do think there are lots of reasons for that. It wasn't all in war. Everyone was involved, and the fate of the world kind of hung in the balance. So it was all hands on deck. And the camouflage corps that were formed within the militaries of the U.S. and Britain employed artists and magicians and actors and directors and even fashion designers. So I think that the creativity that is necessary for deception was definitely enhanced by the fact that there were so many of these creative minds involved in the war. And I think probably my favorite World War II story in this exhibition is about Boeing's Wonderland. So after the bombing of Pearl Harbor in December of 1941, it was feared that the major aircraft factories on the West Coast, which included Douglas and Lockheed in Southern California, and of course Boeing in Seattle, were particularly vulnerable to Japanese bombing attacks. And so a plan was launched to use the talented set designers of Hollywood to construct these fake towns on the tops of the factory buildings to disguise them from the air. And Boeing's Factory Number Two, which was the home of the B-17 bomber and was over 1.5 million square feet in size, they hired John Stuart Detley, who is a famed set designer, to construct this fake neighborhood that they called Wonderland. And it was fake roads and hollow houses atop miles and miles of chicken wire.
Hmm.
It was complete with trees and artificial turf and even white picket fences. And in order to make it seem very realistic, they encouraged the employees of the factory to go up and have their lunch up there. And they had fake cars that were moved around on the streets, and they even hung laundry in some of the backyards of these houses. So the photos from this period, which we highlight in the exhibit, are just fascinating. And I think it was truly one of the most unique camouflage projects of World War II, and it happened right here on our own West
Yeah.
Coast.
There's another story I understand you tell there. We don't have time to get into it, about a Hollywood makeup artist who ended up disguising people in Southeast Asia during World War II. We'll have to leave that for now, but I want to jump into what's really relevant for us today, because your exhibition covers that, I understand. How does the exhibition address, for instance, facial recognition and privacy issues that we all deal with today?
Yes, well, technology really allowed for the creation of so many more tools. We can see beyond the visible spectrum, and we can see like never before. But this society of mass surveillance that we live in, which in many ways keeps us all safer, also makes it harder and harder to be anonymous. So we do tackle this in the exhibit, and we talk about the sort of revolution in facial recognition technologies, how it works, how you can sort of protect yourselves in some ways, the pros and cons of this technology, and the way that this ability to disappear online has also become sort of very fraught, right? We talk about
Mhm.
deep fakes and how to understand and recognize if what you're seeing online is actually true, because that seems to be the most scary thing about the AI revolution.
Yeah, we have a couple minutes left with you, Katheryn. Aside from Wonderland, that Boeing fake town there, what are you most excited about people to discover?
Well, I think I'm most excited about people leaving the exhibit, learning things that they didn't know when they came in, and seeing camouflage in a different way, right? At its core a design principle that has dramatically impacted our lives for decades and generations. And there's real meaning, creative history behind the evolution of this design technique that I
Hmm.
think we take for granted. And I think what we're trying to do with this exhibition is to unpack it, really look at the ways that it's evolved, and teach you things that you maybe won't take for granted when you next time you see camouflage or you encounter it in society.
Hmm. Um, uh, as you just mentioned, camouflage keeps evolving. You see it clearly in this technology from nature to World War II, World War One, World War II, and beyond into our day and age. Any sense from your exhibition or your studies here where you see this story going next in the evolution of camouflage?
Well, invisibility seems to be the goal, right? And whether or not that's achievable, I mean, it's certainly invisibility is achievable in Harry Potter movies, but it seems that in this ongoing game of hide and seek, that the ability to truly disappear and remain anonymous seems to be the goal. And yet we are constantly developing tools that will prevent that from happening. So it's a cat and mouse if there ever was one. And we're just delighted to see where it goes from here.
Oh, this sounds fascinating. This is a new exhibit at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. It runs for 3 years, starting in March of 2026. Katheryn Keane is the Vice President of Exhibits and Collections at the International Spy Museum. Katheryn, thanks for giving us a preview.
Thanks, Ben. It's been a pleasure.
Coming up after a short break, Roy Behrens, a professor emeritus of graphic design at the University of Northern Iowa. That's coming up next. It's River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer, and today you're listening to an archive edition of River to River. An especially fascinating edition I'm finding here of our show today. And if you were with us before the break, you heard how during the Second World War, Hollywood set designers built an entire fake neighborhood on top of a Boeing aircraft factory in Seattle. And from the air, the enemy planes would see suburban homes, residential roads, gardens, even laundry hung out instead of a military target. It was called Boeing Wonderland, just one of the ingenious deception stories featured at a new exhibition at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. It's called Camouflage, Designed to Deceive, exploring how animals, soldiers, spies have used principles of hiding in plain sight as a matter of survival. I'm joined now by Roy Behrens, a professor emeritus of the University of Northern Iowa. He wrote the introduction to this exhibition's catalog and has spent decades studying the intersection of art, design, and camouflage. Roy Behrens, welcome to our studio. Nice to see you right across the table from me. No, you're not hiding from me. You're right there.
It's good to see you. Thank you.
Roy, start us off by telling us, how did this passion for camouflage as art and science first start for you?
Well, if you look at my resume, you'll notice that I was in the U.S. Marine Corps. But that was non-voluntary during the Vietnam War.
Thank you for your service.
But it had nothing to do with that.
Oh.
I would have, but I don't think they were interested. But long before that, when I was growing up, I grew up in a small town where it was adjacent to a wooded area and a creek. And so a block away, I would go over there, and there were all sorts of creatures, wild creatures there. And I became very interested in nature. And then later on, when I became an artist and became a teacher of art and design, I began to notice that the principles of making things appear were sort of the inverse of making them disappear.
Explain that.
Well, when you make something appear, you make it stand out. But you also make other things within that frame, recede, go back, become, so you play with emphasis. And that's what camouflage does too, in part. It distracts us and makes us see things other than what's there.
Mm-hmm. I understand you gave students assignments to make objects disappear. Well, walk us through that. Is that what your assignment was?
Yeah, I was teaching high school and junior high for 1 year before the Marine Corps. And one of my teachers when I was in school had said that when he was in school, he had a painting teacher who asked them to try to paint out shadows.
Paint out shadows.
Yeah, the shadows that would fall on a canvas. Can you paint them out? And that's I always thought about that. And when I was teaching students, high school students, I thought, wait a minute, how can I teach them to see? How can I teach them to design? Maybe what I'll do is I'll have them glue something, a dimensional object like a spoon or whatever, on a flat background, and then I'll ask them to paint it out.
Make it disappear.
Make it disappear.
To our perception.
Yeah.
Not really paint it over, but just make it, blend in so much that your eyes don't discern it. It doesn't pop. Is that what you mean?
Well, that was one way. They learned that they could do it by blending. So they make the figure match the background, and it disappears that way. But there were other ways, too, and one of them that people don't know as much about is that they could break it up, because if it doesn't seem to be a singular, continuous thing, then it becomes very hard.
Make the spoon have different segments of color.
Exactly, and some of those segments begin to match the background as well, because the background is also broken up. So now we're getting into really two categories of camouflage that are widely used and always have been. In fact, they're all over nature in animal camouflage.
Yeah. Take us through quickly the core principles of camouflage, and you've just mentioned, I think, one of them at least, right? Or two of them.
Yeah. Well, those are two. And the one that if you walk out on the street and you ask somebody, what is camouflage? Almost always people will say, well, that's figure ground blending. That's when an object blends with its background.
Camouflage hat, you're in the jungle and you've got whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Camo.
But there are other kinds, and there's one that people know about but probably don't think about much. But there's something called counter shading. And that was discovered by an artist in the 1890s when he wondered why so many animals have white undersides. How do they have white bellies?
Yeah.
And he thought about it. And he had gone to art school, and they showed him how to shade. So it's something flat on a drawing board could make it look like it was coming off the surface, which is the opposite of shading. And he said, that's the answer. Those animals are counter-shaded. Their shading is on the top. That's where they're darkest. And then on the bottom, they are lightest. So when the overhead light is shining, then it counteracts that, and they look flat. And then the other one that people also talk about is this notion of disruption. And you can see it all over the place. You can see it in all sorts of butterflies or animals or whatever. And it breaks up the figure, just makes it harder to see as a continuous thing. But the most important example of it, perhaps, and the most interesting one, occurred in World War I, when the Germans were having enormous success with submarines. And no one knew how to protect the ships. And they said, obviously, we'll make them blend with the horizon. Well, you couldn't, because the lighting and the conditions were changing constantly. Mm-hmm. So they came up with the idea of, we've got to make it harder to hit. It can be as visible as you want, but if it's confusing and...
So you came up with these kind of cubist-like patterns? Is that
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
People immediately thought that they had been painted by cubists because they looked to be erratic and they were.
How did that confuse the targeting, though? Help us understand that.
It's complex because you have to remember that periscope or submarines didn't fire the periscope while they were on surface. They could only surface for a matter of a fraction of a minute. And then they had to go down, and having calculated the readings that they got, then they tried to determine where is that ship going to be by the time the torpedo gets there.
I see.
And if through perspective tricks and all sorts of contrasts, if they could throw off the calculations.
I see. So they're trying to fool the person in the periscope who's trying to determine the distance and the speed at which that
and the direction too.
And the direction at which that ship is headed.
Yes. Yeah. So
I understand you have a great story about a camouflage expert in this is also the First World War, President Wilson, demonstrating a fake rock to the president.
Yeah.
What was that story?
Well, they were working on these camouflage practices that they were going to employ in Europe, and they sent an invitation to Wilson in the White House one afternoon to come and to see some demonstrations there. And he came to the camp, and they had been working on one, and he was standing in the field. We have a photograph of this, and they tell him, President, there's a soldier within 5 feet of you. And he doesn't believe it because he's looking at the field. He doesn't see anything. I mean, there's some grass, a little bit of grass. There are some rocks here and there, but nothing terribly possible for anyone to hide in. But suddenly, the rock moves, and it's paper mache. It's a theater prop, and there's a trench underneath the rock, and that's where the soldier comes out of.
Oh.
Yeah. So there's a lot of that going on. Now, that's the fourth kind of camouflage, which is mimicry. So you're making not a figure look like a background. You're making one thing appear to be some other thing.
Right. And we know from nature, too, what comes to mind is the insect, the walking stick.
Yes.
That is actually an insect, but it looks like a stick on a, laying somewhere. Anyway, let me remind our listeners, Roy Behrens, my guest for this portion of the program, Professor Emeritus of Graphic Design at the University of Northern Iowa, spent decades studying how camouflage works and why it matters, and he's written the introduction to a new exhibit in our nation's capital that digs into all kinds of things. I really want to see this exhibition in the Capitol, but in the time that we have left, I want to dig into something that you have done in terms of women's contributions to camouflage. How does that connect with your study?
Well, this happened during World War I as well, and you can imagine what was happening then because women did not have the vote. They couldn't have access to their own financial security. They couldn't determine whether or not they should go through childbirth. All these kinds of things. And they were also not allowed to serve in the military because as a gender, they simply weren't capable. And they were
a discussion that's still going on.
It's true.
Yeah, okay.
But so some of the women got together and they formed a reserve, which was a civilian group. And they got the government to have someone train them in camouflage. And of course, what they did, because they still had that prejudice, they said, women would be really good at using fabric to make camouflage suits that look like rocks.
That's how the women fit in the men's minds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was the first thing. And then later on, it was the camouflage, the Navy camouflage department that were among the first to allow women to actually serve in supporting camouflage.
Mm-hmm. This is at the International Espionage Spy Museum. How does camouflage in espionage differ from camouflage in warfare, or does it?
Well, I'm not sure that it does. I mean, you can make all sorts of categories, and but the principles are always the same.
Mm-hmm.
And did you notice that nearly everything I've been talking about is based on the human perception of similarity or difference, right? And that's just low similarity. So that's terribly, terribly important. That's the basis on how we identify things, how we categorize them, stuff like that. So you really, even if you don't want to, if you start studying this, you kind of end up being a perceptual psychologist.
When you walk through your days with all the decades of study and the knowledge that you have about camouflage, do you walk downtown to the market, along the street, out in the woods? Your perception must be so educated in this area that you have a fascinating experience just walking around in the woods.
Well, designers often say that. They say that they can't go down a city street without looking at the signage. And they can see where the spacing is wrong on all the signs.
Does it ruin it? It could ruin it for you if it's wrong.
Well, it also makes it amusing.
Well, what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about how camouflage works?
Well, I think it's confusing when we say that camouflage is always about making something disappear. It's true. But if you're making it look like something else, then it's still appearing, but it's appearing to be something else. So it's just people find that confusing sometimes, and so they revert to the blending idea.
Mm-hmm. We started this conversation by saying your passion here was awakened by what you observed in nature in the woods when you were a young one. Can we still learn from the way nature does camouflage, or have we sort of tapped that out? Do we know everything that nature is doing to disguise or hide?
Well, there's a lot of research going on, and much of it is going on as studies of nature. And there have been some big breakthroughs. The cuttlefish. I don't know if you've heard about that research.
Heard of it, but I don't know the research.
Oh, it's fantastic. They're sort of related to octopuses, and they can not only change their color, they can change their pattern. They can produce interbody illusions of movement. They're just unbelievable. And if you ever have a chance to go online and see some of the videos of those.
Look up a cuttlefish in disguise or whatever.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a chameleon. It can blend in, but in a more sophisticated way than a chameleon?
And you won't believe the sophistication.
Oh, I know this isn't the main area of your research, but where do you see camouflage research and the application headed in our digital age? We've got a lot of facial recognition out there. Do you have any thought on the deepest level why camouflage matters in our present day and on into the future?
Well, I think anyone living in our society today would be concerned about the effectiveness of camouflage, not because of how it might help us, but how it might be abused. Through distraction, even, we watch magicians and pickpockets, and there are lots of people in important positions who make use of distraction and things of that kind, or simply in lying so that you make something look like it's something else, and you just keep saying it. That's an old tactic.
We've got about a minute left. What is the main point that you wanted to get across in the introduction to this exhibition at the International Spy Museum?
Well, it was very much like what I was just saying a minute ago, that it has evolved and it's going to continue to evolve. Because one of the things you have to know is that camouflage only works if it evolves in line with the viewer, with the technology.
It's a cat and mouse game.
Yes. So deer hunters go out and they're wearing bright orange, right? And you say, well, that's crazy. Well, aren't the deer looking at No, deer are colorblind to that orange.
The deer are looking for movement, aren't they?
Yes, and other kinds of clues, but they have a different visual system. And so you can address that for safety, or you can address it for effectiveness.
We've got to go. You remind me of my dog, long gone, but I used to throw a neon yellow tennis ball. She could always find it, except after it had snowed. And then when it landed in completely white snow, the neon yellow had made the ball disappear.
That's great. Sounds like me on the tennis court.
Roy Behrens, what a joy to have you in our studio. Professor Emeritus of Graphic Design at the University of Northern Iowa. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll be back with more River to River from IPR News. You're listening to an archive edition of River to River. I'm Ben Kiefer. We've been talking about camouflage and deception. There's another kind of deception, however, and that's just as fascinating, perhaps more consequential. It's the way our memories can deceive us. My next guest, Isabela Muzzio, grew up in Argentina during a military dictatorship there in the 1970s and 80s. And she lived with fear, heard about people disappearing, witnessed military soldiers interrupting her high school classes, in fact. Well, years later, after Argentina became a democracy, she was shocked to discover that the people she grew up with, and these are people from the same city, the same culture, who lived through the same events that she did, remembered those years completely differently. Some saw atrocities. Others saw necessary actions in a war. And that was a realization that set her on the path to understanding how memories work, how they change over time, and how our beliefs shape what we remember. Today, she's the Ronnie Ketchel Professor in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences at the University of Iowa. She studies really fascinating things, how major events like January 6th or September 11th are encoded in our brains and then also modified every time we remember them. Isabela Muzzio, sitting next to me or across from me at the table here in our studio. Isabel, what a fascinating area of work you found here. So glad to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you so much for the invitation. And I want to clarify something. I am interested in studying memory modification, but I work with animals. And essentially, I am not studying the events that happen to humans. I think that my research has implications for those events.
I see.
But I study how the memories change in the brain and how they can be modified over time and under what circumstances these memories can be modified.
Okay, so I've got it. You're studying animals, but we can then have hypotheses about how our human brains are affected with our memories.
Correct.
Let's start with your upbringing in Argentina under the military dictatorship. What do you remember about that kind of fear and uncertainty as a child?
I was very young when these events were going on, and I just remember growing up with fear. My parents always said to us, my siblings and I, that we shouldn't talk about anything political at school, that we should keep to ourselves. But I saw things going on, and I saw that sometimes the military would come to our school, especially search older students and make sure that they didn't have anything political. And I heard that whenever they found dissidents, they would take them and people would never find them again.
So people disappeared from your community?
Yes.
And later we found out they went to camps.
They were tortured. They were many times killed. It is estimated that between 10,000 to 30,000 people disappeared during the Dirty War. Mm-hmm. And even in my neighborhood, I heard, for example, that all the children that the pharmacist had disappeared. So even though my parents tried to protect us from what was going on because we were very young and not involved in politics at all, it was impossible not to hear about these events and not to fear apprehension about what was going on. And then when things came to light after Argentina transitioned into democracy, it was incredible to me that some people who lived through the same events, some of my classmates, recalled some of the same events that I experienced under a completely different light.
Mm-hmm.
And that made me become interested in how we encode memories and whether memories are subject to modification through the experiences that we go through, maybe the context that in which we encode those events, and so on. And that became the passion of my life.
Well, it's a fascinating passion to have. So when you started doing your research, I'm seeing perhaps you worked with infants, or was
Yes.
this with infants, or was this with baby animals or humans?
No, when I started, I received all my education in this country. When I started, because the question about memory modification was so important to me, I worked with human infants, and I worked with a professor, Caroline Rovi-Collier, who has passed away. But she was studying memory modification in infants that range from 3 months old to a year and a half, 2 years. And we will play, my experiments involve playing games with the infants and introducing something new to the game. And normally, an infant would only play with, for example, a mobile that they are used to. We play the game that if they move the feet, they would move the mobile. But somehow if we alter the context and then we tested them in a completely new setting, in a new crib with a new mobile, they would just generalize the information. They would play as if they had encoded that information in the original event when I trained them. So it was a way to modify the memory of the infants. And that actually was so intriguing to me that at that point I thought, I have to get into the brain. I have to see what is going on at the neuronal level. How is that memories can be modified? At the time in the country, there was a lot of interest in memory modification because there was a researcher called Elizabeth Loftus who was testing students, college students, and she was showing them a scene of an accident. And then she would interrogate the students and ask them, did you see the stop sign where the cars collided?
Yes.
And there was never a stop sign at the scene. But most of the students, after being asked, would say, yes, we are completely sure that we saw the stop sign. So she introduced the idea that memories could be modified through questioning, and authority figures play a big role in this, because if a researcher is asking you, did you see the stop sign, maybe you become convinced that there was one when there wasn't.
If you've just joined us talking this portion of the program with Isabela Muzzio from the University of Iowa about how our memories of major events are shaped by beliefs and change over time, why people can witness the same event, remember it in radically different ways. I know we're skipping over a lot of territory. Perhaps you can bring in your research about how memory works, because we know, everyone knows, that if we think back at what we think our best memories are from perhaps decades ago, they are almost always connected with either very positive or very negative emotions. So what is happening with our neurons in our brain there that imprints those times? I can think of the birth of all three of my children. Very positive experience, but I will never forget those. But also another thing, let's take nearly drowning in a cold lake, which I've also experienced, imprinted on my brain in the same way. So how does emotion work with our memories and how that may change? Because I have a feeling I have a crystal clear memory of it, but you're saying I don't.
No, you don't, but I will explain this better. Emotional memories become encoded in a much stronger way than a neutral memory, because they activate more primary areas in the brain, such as the amygdala. The amygdala is the emotional center of the brain. And when those areas are activated, the salience of that information gets engraved in our brains and is very long-lasting. But what you think you remember, and everybody remembers emotional memories, either positive or negative, much more than neutral memories. But what you think you remember is the core components of the memories, not the details. I always give the example of September 11. When I ask people if they remember the events of September 11, normally people remember where they were, with whom they were, because the arousal that we felt that day makes that those memories extremely long-lasting. But if I ask people, what did you eat that day? Or what clothes you were wearing, they cannot remember those details.
No.
And if I tell someone, well, maybe don't you remember that we ate a sandwich because there was nothing that was open in New York City? So maybe that wasn't true, but the person will come to believe that he or she ate a sandwich because those details are modifiable along, as we remember and we retrieve the information.
I understand you have a distinct memory of September 11th because you were at Columbia Medical School.
Correct.
You saw one of the towers actually fall?
Correct.
Whoa.
I was in New York City that day, and I was driving to the medical school, and by the time I went there to the lab, one of the towers had fallen, and we were seeing from the office of my postdoctoral advisor, we saw the second tower falling. So those memories are very vivid in my mind, and I would never forget. But as I said, so many details about that day, I cannot recall.
Yeah. Use your expertise to help us understand how people can see or remember January 6th differently. The spectrum is from a riot, a self-coup, an insurrection, all the way to, our president has described it as a day of love, I think, a peaceful protest. How can someone authentically believe both of those things, or one of those things, one person, and another thing, another person?
When we encode information, especially emotional events, we are activating, as I said, the emotional regions in the brain. And then when we activate those regions, if the memories that we experience somehow coincide with the beliefs that we have that also result from the learning that we experience throughout our life, then there will be assimilated in our knowledge base. And we, over time, form schemas or frameworks. A schema is a framework that allows us to respond in similar ways in different situations. Schemas are very, very useful. We all have them. For example, if you go to a restaurant, you expect to be seated, you expect that someone will bring a menu and that you will order food. So it allows you to behave in proper ways in any restaurant that you go. But also, schemas allow us to interpret what we are experiencing and how we encode information based on the knowledge base that we have formed. So, for example, nowadays, if someone leans progressive, the outlets that this person is going to be listening to coincide more with reading the New York Times or perhaps listening to MSNBC, CNN. If someone leans conservative, they will prefer to listen to Fox News, Newsmax, etc. So as the events that are happening, emotional events that happen in the country are experienced and the person encodes them in the context of the outlets that somehow reinforce their beliefs, they are going to be encoded in a different way for different people. Mm-hmm. And the brain also activates different brain regions. There is a landmark study that was done in the year 2006 in which a researcher, Drew Weston, recruited Republicans and Democrats to participate in the experiment. And it was during the Bush versus Kerry campaign. And the subjects were presented with information that either contradicted or was in agreement with something their candidate said. When the information contradicted something that the preferred candidate said, the regions that control emotion, such as the anterior cingulate, got very activated. I forgot to say these subjects were placed in an fMRI scanner that measures brain.
Oh, you could see the brain in
yes,
action.
You can see what areas in the brain are active. And the interesting thing is that when they were offered the opportunity to find a justification for the disagreement between what the candidate said and the evidence, they found that areas in the brain that control our reward system in the ventral caudate nucleus were activated. So essentially, they were dealing with new information by activating the amygdala, having an emotional response if the information contradicted what they believed, and having a sense of reward when they came up with an explanation that was in agreement. But the most interesting fact for me was that the areas that control reasoning, such as the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, were not involved. Yeah. So there is not so much reasoning when we assimilate news.
I could talk with you all afternoon. I would love that, but we only have a couple minutes left.
I'm sorry.
Isabel, a critical question at this point seems to me, before we go and say goodbye, if we expose people to alternative political views consistently over time, would their memories and beliefs adjust? What would you expect to see? In that one instance, when you have the contradiction there, the brain adjusts and finds an explanation for it, but consistently.
Consistently, you would have more tolerance, but initially you would have the reactions that I just described. There is a process called extinction, in which any memory or emotional memory can lose its strength when you expose the subject to something that somehow is different to what was encoded. So if you expose people to counter-arguments and consistently show them that there are alternative views, eventually the person will become more open-minded. But very rarely that happens these days, and we are more polarized than ever before.
Yes, absolutely. What are the broader implications here? How do these individual memories, these processes, scale up to a collective memory, cultural memory of major events? And sorry, we only have about a minute left.
Well, that's a really difficult question because the collective memory can be influenced by social events and so many aspects. I do think that how societies develop schemas, which is the framework that allows them to encode new information, is very, very important. And I would say that the way information is distributed and what information can be accessed by different groups will determine how the groups react to new information, which is a question that can be debated for another hour, I guess. Yeah. But I only have a minute. So I would say that nowadays I am always positive, and I feel that we have ways in which we can have more diversity in thinking and become more pluralistic in our thoughts. But it will require significant changes in the way people are exposed to news and current events.
We'll have to have you back if you'd like, Isabel, because we didn't really broach, and you just sort of referred to constant media coverage, social media, and so forth. Will you come back and talk with us?
Definitely.
Isabela Muzzio of the University of Iowa, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Today's program produced by Danny Gear, our executive producer, Katheryn Perkins. Thanks for joining us.